Good afternoon, everybody. This is the Freelance Teacher, and today we're actually going to talk a little bit of history because we have what could be seen as a major moment in American history. And what I'm talking about is the matching of two concepts that have happened lately. One of them is the death or near death of the mainstream media, and the other one is a concept called overproduction. Now, you get a better lesson about overproduction in the Ultimate History lesson. The people at Tragedy and Hope magazine have a lesson by John Taylor Gatto. It's 5 parts. It's about 5 hours. And hour 5, John Taylor Gatto, who was Teacher of the Year in New York a bunch of times, he talks about overproduction in the sense of how it was talked about in the late 1800s and the early 1900s. And it was talked about in the press by the top of the pyramid, by the elite, as something very dangerous. And what they were talking about is in a system of capitalism, and particularly free market capitalism, and America was about as close as you're going to get back then to free market capitalism, and the government was a tiny part of people's lives. And the top of the pyramid, the elite, were worried about overproduction. What they meant was that you had an American people that after the Civil War, notice no big wars between 1865 and 1898, and even then, really until World War I in 1917, talking about decades of no major military conflict. So post-Civil War, you have a very free United States. Comparatively, I know there are things we need to talk about in terms of inequality within the country, but overall, a free United States, and you have the American people were wildly creative. And I want you to think about that for a minute. You've got Thomas Edison, you have the Industrial Revolution, starting in the late 1840s, you have the telegraph. Things really start to speed up. You have the automobile industry going from nothing to everything between 1895 and 1915. That's 20 years. You have major industries coming up where they hadn't before. Lots of trade. You hear about this in history class as the sugar trusts and the cotton trusts. And then you have the major oil industry, the Rockefeller people. But you also have regular people becoming extremely wealthy, for lack of a better word, in their ability to create capital for themselves. Now, in a gold standard, you had people garnering actual wealth, meaning they didn't have to get slips of paper if they didn't want. They could go to the bank and exchange slips of paper for gold or silver, and they did. And so you started to see the rumbling in the press, and this is John Taylor Gatto gives you a much better overview of this in his book, The Underground History of American Education, and in the Ultimate History lesson. Both of those things I recommend very highly. But the overproduction, today I guess we'd call it a meme, but the overproduction idea was very strong, and you saw it in the press all the time. And it was seen as a boogeyman. It was something really bad, meaning that if you overproduce goods, the price will go down. Now, that doesn't hurt anybody except the people at the top of the pyramid. So a Rockefeller, a Carnegie, a Vanderbilt, all the titans of industry back then were Morgan. Let's put him on the list too. We're deathly afraid of regular Americans coming up with amazing inventions. Right? You can't have a Thomas Edison. Look into Thomas Edison's background. Look into his childhood. He was not born into wealth. For all of his flaws, he was not born into wealth. He was not a major player. He was completely free to come up with inventions and patents to build a better mousetrap, to come up with a better product, to come up with a better service. And it wasn't just Edison. There were tons of people. Madam C.J. Walker is on this list. There are people who were nothing, and because they were free and able to create, they knocked off some big shots at the top. So overproduction, the mantle of overproduction comes in, and the government does what it always does. You need a license to do this. Licensing is a big thing. Probably, what is it, a third of the United States needs permission from a government entity to do what it knows how to do. Now, you don't ask Auntie to see her license if she can take care of your kid. Why not? According to the government, she needs a license for daycare. Well, it's a school and there's more than one kid. And you see how this gets really bad? If you have a relative, does your mother take care of your child? Does she have a license? Does grandma have a license to take care of kids? Does she do addition with your 3-year-old? You see what I'm saying? The licensing thing is just a break on freedom. And so the power elite, who of course fund government with campaign contributions and other ways, the first thing they start off is with licensing, because they were deathly afraid of wanting people to stop creating and coming up with things that were cheaper. And so you have now the progressive era and licensing and scientific management and all the things that came in during that horrible era that basically put the American government, local and state and federal, in control of people's lives. And the top of the great myth is the trust busting stuff. Yeah, what trust busting? Right? ExxonMobil, has it hurt them very much? Right? That's still what used to be Standard Oil. Trust busting. These people command the people that you look to write legislation to even the playing field. So before I get way off topic, and we're getting near 7 minutes now, but overproduction, right, is the overproduction of goods or services, and we are seeing this today in the media. And that's really my point with you tonight, is you have, and I think the Trump campaign showed this, regardless of what you think about his campaign, social media and the ubiquity, the ever-present social media news sources that were not mainstream news, I think have made mainstream media defunct. I think it's made mainstream media a non-issue. There are people out there who just ignore mainstream media. And it's not just the alt-right. You have people on the left who don't bother with mainstream media, but hardly at all. I'm thinking of somebody like Chris Hedges, but there are others as well. And these people sell tons of books. You have people in the libertarian world, Stefan Molyneux. I don't think he's ever been in a mainstream media interview ever in his entire career. And there are millions of downloads and views, and he runs a philosophy show. And it's probably pretty lucrative. He doesn't put out how much he makes, but other people do, right? Danger and Play, there's a guy that, Cernovich, who is classified as alt-right, and I think he's been on mainstream media twice, and he sells more books and puts out more content and has more followers than mainstream media sites all over the place. And so I'm not looking at sides of the aisle or political affiliation. What I'm saying is the overproduction of media has made mainstream media a non-issue. I think the first casualty, and it's probably about 100 years too late, the first casualty of overproduction has been the corporate media. They have so little power. These are not the kingmakers anymore. And we have a king. Maybe that's not a Freudian slip. Maybe the Trump presidency, hopefully it doesn't go the way of monarchy, but the old kingmakers were telling us in the early parts of the primaries that it was going to be Jeb Bush, maybe Marco Rubio, versus Hillary Clinton. That's how it was going to go. That's what the New York Times told us. Whatever's left of Newsweek, Time Magazine, NBC, ABC, CNN, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times. Did I say them already? And no. There's so much media being produced. There are so many different websites. There are tons of blogs. There's lots of intelligent analysis that the overproduction of media, a free media, the ability to put up a website. Look at the Corbett report. James Corbett is a guy who lives in Japan who started off doing these oddly voiced blogs and videos and podcasts, speaking really slowly in his deep voice. And he now has kind of a small empire. And I don't think he's ever on mainstream media. Corbett report is, to me, 99 times more valuable than whatever the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal put on the internet. I don't even know what those people put out there. And I'm not a young person. I'm 44, right? I mean, I know I look 24, right? Thank you. I appreciate that. But I'm 44. Imagine what the young people do. Imagine what the young people are looking at. They're not looking at the New York Times. They're not reading the Wall Street Journal. They're not watching ABC. So the massive amount of very inexpensively priced media, a free media, has destroyed the corporate oligarchy. I want to leave you with this. If you were free to do whatever else it is you wanted to do, right? I can speak to you intelligently about starting a daycare. I can speak to you intelligently about being in the education world. If you were free to teach or take care of children or build cars, try building a car, right? Or sell a car. Do something like that, right? Build your own vehicle. Make a blender, right? Build a toaster oven. Build a plane. Remember that podcast I had, video cast about the Wright brothers? They didn't have any permits to fill out. They didn't ask for permission to build an airplane. They had gasoline and a drill press and an engine lathe in the back of their bicycle shop, right? They'd be carted off to prison. They'd be fined thousands of dollars today because they didn't. Do you have a permit for that gas can in the back? So overproduction, think about if you were free, like the corporate oligarchs have been deposed by the new media, by the internet. I want you to think about that with everything else. And in my opinion, the America of the old days, now it wasn't perfect, but it was a hell of a lot more economically free. And the overproduction that has taken down corporate media was taking down everything else. And this massive empire of military might and arms races and military and prison industrial complex, all of that got started when the elites, the top of the pyramid that I always refer to, started to say, you know what? And they did this through their agents in the press. They started to say, you know what? Overproduction is bad. And it lowers prices for consumers. And it makes their creative juices flow. And we got to stop that. And that was really the beginning of the end. And I think if you can keep these concepts in your mind and you start to realize the barriers to entry for you to do things you want to do, that overproduction for us regular folk is a good thing. And maybe you should think about overproducing. The media's down. Maybe you can do something to break through the barriers that have been built up to you to protect you, as they said back in 1904, against overproduction. So keep that in mind. TheFreelanceTeacher.com is my website. There are other websites to check out as well that are great for news, and we've seen their value, and we've seen what they've done, and we've seen what freedom can do. Don't be afraid of being free, right? That should be your goal. Have a good night. My name's Doug Marola. I'm the Freelance Teacher. I'll talk to you next time.